All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you again for joining. AUDIENCEX's Cookie Countdown continues. So this is part 2 in our webinar series, kind of tracking everything that has to do with the cookieless future and kind of the cookie deprecation. So today we have a great list of panelists, but before we get started, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining and kind of share a bit about AUDIENCEX. So for those of you who don't know, AUDIENCEX is one of the largest independent trading desks here in the US. We have offices all over, and really our goal is to provide unbiased media planning and execution for brands and agencies. So we work with over 22 platforms offering kind of strategy, insights, execution, and performance geared to drive outcomes for brands. So please do, if you have any question about us as a company, we're happy to follow up. Definitely check out our new website. We just launched and rebranded. So we'd love to get your guys' feedback. But today joining us, we have a great panel of speakers. I'll let them all introduce themselves, and to kind of kick off, we'll go in order. But I would just like to ask the panelists, we're kind of moving now into kind of a new phase of kind of COVID. Everyone's talking about it. But I think what would be interesting for our attendees is to kind of hear, are your companies going back to work? I think that's a lot of the new discussions today, whether companies are doing a hybrid approach. Just as a little icebreaker to what do you look forward to most in terms of returning life and getting back to normal? But would love to hear about your company, what you do, and we'll kind of spend 5 minutes there before we dive into the session today.
Cool. My name is Austin Gemp. I work at the Trade Desk, which is a large independent DSP that helps our agency and brand partners action against their data and measurement solutions across omni-channel buys across the open web. I specifically work with a number of our West Coast-based large brand and agency partners. We are planning to go back into the office. We'll probably be back in the office around August or September. And honestly, I'm really looking forward to meeting face-to-face the 30 to 40 people we hired in LA at TTD in the last year and a couple months. There's a bunch of new faces that I've seen on Zoom, but have yet to meet in person. So really excited to get that opportunity.
Mark, what about you?
Yeah, hi, I'm Mark Dye, Chief Strategy Officer at Bombora. We're a B2B data company. Been around the space for a while. I co-founded a company called Bizzo in 2008, which we sold to LinkedIn. We are opening our offices in New York in June. And so I'm going to our Reno office in late June. So we're starting to trickle back in slowly. And like Austin, we've probably got 20 new members on my direct team that I've not even met in person yet. So I'm looking forward to getting back and meeting everyone.
Great. And what about you, Travis?
Hey everyone, great to be here. Travis Klinger, Senior Vice President of Addressability at LiveRamp. So I oversee all of our product lines and then our global business development teams around making inventory addressable for marketers. So LiveRamp's run the ecosystem is to enable the safe and efficient use of data. So first, second, third-party data across marketer use cases. So our team focuses on all of the different publishers across the open internet, CTV, display, and mobile and app. For return to office, so I am also excited to get back to the office. Our official opening date is going to be September, but we are soft reopening. And depending on each city in the world, but here in San Francisco, will be soft reopening in June for folks who want to go back.
Great. We have Garrett.
Am I up next?
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Garrett McGrath. I'm VP of Product at Magnite. Magnite is a pretty large SSP or exchange. We are the combination of the former Rubicon project, the former Teleria exchange, and the former SpotX exchange. I oversee all things non-long form video is the best way to put it. So display, online video, mobile, everything that's not long form video. We too also are aiming for September, I think, to return to office. It's a really unique situation for us because in the last year, we've done one merger and one acquisition of Teleria and SpotX. So there's hundreds of people I have not met. I talk to them a lot. I feel like I know them online, but there's so many people we haven't spoken to in person. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Great. And then we have our very own Max.
Hey everyone, Max Zhang, VP of Ad Ops, oversee the programmatic media and search and social team for AX. I work with Annie quite a bit. I am excited, absolutely returning to the office soon, especially since I've just joined the AX team about my 3rd month now. So I haven't met a single person in person yet. So really excited about heading back into the office and seeing everyone. And just honestly being able to get out of my seat more often. I find myself glued in the seat at home, and before I know it, the sun has sunset. So really looking forward to seeing everyone and being more mobile in that sense. So yeah, I'm excited about it. I think we're back in September. I think that's kind of what we earmarked. So
Correct. Great. Well, I'm glad to hear things will hopefully be going back to normal. But again, we're here kind of to talk about the cookies. I recently today found out, a survey from Adobe kind of pulled that 37% of companies feel that they're very prepared with a world without third-party cookies. But with that percentage, there's still a lot of clients that are still kind of making sense of the space and kind of taking a wait and see approach. I wanted to get, an update from you guys. Like, what do you think of the space happening right now? Is this kind of wait and see approach viable for marketers? Or, we only have about 6-7 months left before we're kind of completely to do without cookies or third-party cookies in particular. So would love to kind of set the stage of just where we're at, how things have been developing, especially from Google and kind of the different updates and solutions, and just kick it off from the marketer's point of view. Do you feel they're prepared? What questions are they asking you guys?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Bombora, its clients, we are an ad tech data company, but our primary business is data licensing to big brands. So our brands are, the normal cast of characters: American Express, AT&T, Cisco, Intel, Amazon, right? The big advertisers. And so I've been on the phone with their agencies and executives at those companies nonstop since Q4. And what we're seeing is, we actually introduced a cookieless product a year ago. So it would have been right at the start of COVID, like February. And there was zero interest, right? With COVID going on and cookies are still 2 years away. And there really wasn't any interest. It started picking up in Q4, and now, and I love your guys' thoughts on this as well, but in the last 2 months, it seems to be accelerating at a breakneck pace. I mean, everyone now is getting involved. There's all kinds of different alternatives. It's Austin and I were just talking about this last week. It's going to be a very fragmented start because there's so many different solutions. And what I'm recommending to everyone is get started, start experimenting while cookies are still around, so you can compare what you're doing to cookies. So at least you have a baseline. But I'm personally, and in Bombora, we're seeing a very rapid acceleration in people wanting to start testing and trying different alternatives.
Yeah, I tend to spend many hours per week having these conversations with both the buy and sell side. I think it's critical to be prepared, be thinking about it, and be testing as much as possible today. I always tend to try to remember to mention, but the third-party cookie is still here at the moment, so don't stop using it. But it's important to prepare for when it's not and understand what your options are. I know we're in a public forum and we're being recorded, so maybe this is controversial, and this is strictly my opinion, but I don't think that the cookie going away is 6 months away or January. I frankly never thought it was January. And the things that are going on in the industry and with the W3C, I think it's further out in time. That being said, that's not a message to not get prepared or not investigate what will work best for your brand and your spend and your measurement needs. It's a really interesting time because it's going to be, to Mark's point, a kind of a rocky start. But I think ultimately this will be an improvement for the entire industry within a year or two.
And I think. Oh, sorry, Austin, go for it.
was going to say, I think it's just important to note that the earlier you can start, the better, but also that some of the solutions in the market and a lot of the solutions that will eventually find their way in the market, I think, offer improvements over cookies, right? And so to look at the cookie space today and look at your options today, right? There are things today that are supplemental to that, but many of which can offer improvements to the way that brands interacted with cookies today. And so by getting an early start, by testing out some of those solutions, you can end up with certainly a comparative point, but you might end up with some additional data or insight or additional performance from your campaigns just by using a new identifier that is a little bit more powerful in various capacities. And I think that's an important note as well.
And I think it's really important that we remember that the world is actually almost, majority cookieless today, right? 40% of the world is cookieless, Safari, Firefox, Edge. So when we talk about the end of the cookie coming, it's here. We saw ATT iOS 14.5 roll out just a few weeks ago. Chrome is already cookieless on any iPhone devices, iOS devices that it runs. I actually do think the January timeline is holding. I think what we're seeing is I'll go on record of disagreeing. We can put some money on it and or maybe like a nice dinner, Garrett, around where it ends. I'll go on record of saying I do think that's going away. But I think also, and Austin, to your point, start buying now. I mean, I think what we've seen is marketers really leaning into, okay, the world is cookieless on Safari, Firefox. How do I access that? Because right now you have this opportunity to use the cookie where it exists and certainly benefit from its scale, but also access the cookieless inventory where it exists, where you now have new people-based identifiers out there. And I think we're seeing a lot of marketers start to take advantage of that. And we're seeing just case study after case study that says when you move away from cookie-based buying to people-based buying, you get way better results. And so I think, the message to marketers is now is not the time for planning. Now is the time for action and testing. You've got a cookieless world already. You've got people-based identity out there already. And whether the cookie goes away in January or whether it goes away in March or even August of next year, if you can get better results by not buying into cookie today, why would any marketer wait?
Yeah.
For the record, I 100% agree with everything you just said except for the date.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Testing, right? All marketers need to kind of activate today on just, building that baseline and benchmark. But with a brand and how often they vary too in kind of their tactics, what would you suggest is a good first test to employ? Looking at a brand that has a lot of first party data versus a brand that doesn't. I think with so much noise in terms of different cookieless options, it could be quite overwhelming for marketers on just where do I even begin? Like, what do I want to prioritize first too, depending on what data I already have. So definitely Austin too, would love to get your opinion on this.
Yeah, I think there's certainly opportunities to action against first party data that you have today. And many DSPs, the Trade Desk included, provide multiple avenues for that, right? I think that's a key element of where I hope this discussion goes, is that as Mark alluded to earlier, there's not one identifier for the future, right? There wasn't one identifier in the past, right? We had cookies, we had device IDs, we had many, and cookies as a loose term, but owned by many, many, many different entities. And so there will be tons of different identifiers in the future. There will be some consolidation as to how those are written. But you can actually get to that first party data today. So whether that's using a solution like LiveRamp, where you can take that data, upload it, turn it into an IDL, pass that into a DSP or another buying platform and action against that or measure against that, or whether it's uploading CRM directly to a buying platform to get that CRM data in there and action against that. There's multiple options for activating data. There's multiple ways to test that against the buys that you've done in the past and against the historical KPIs that you've achieved. And so starting to activate that, I think, is certainly important if that data exists. If that data doesn't exist, I think it's about planning for a future on how you build access to a better understanding of your user base. And that's perhaps a more challenging conversation or a more interesting conversation, depending on which way you look at it. But those are the advertisers that I would encourage to start planning now, right? Like if they haven't made that plan, if they haven't started to think about how they're going to collect first party data and manage their audiences, now start thinking about. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Go to some research, go ask for help, and figure out what's the best one for your business.
That's great. And what about Mark? I mean, what is your opinion on this? Because A lot of brands today, especially in the B2B space, they come to Bombora to kind of activate those rich audience and kind of those segments. How should they be looking at kind of your company's data from like a cookieless point of view? And how can marketers today kind of test kind of cookieless solutions your team offers, and compare that to maybe not cookie-free solutions?
Yeah, it's a really nuanced conversation, right? Because to Austin and Travis's point earlier, Safari's been cookieless for quite a while, right? As has Firefox. And it's not cookies going away, it's third-party cookies going away. First-party cookies, are still not going anywhere. I mean, we run a big publisher co-op, right? So our publishers, we have all the trade publications, and as well as Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, CNN, all the big guys, right? And so the publisher side has been collecting this first-party data for quite a while, and they will continue to. And so our publisher co-op, where our data is sourced from, it still has access to this data. They share that data with us in a second-party environment. And so our world is not going to change all that dramatically. The only thing that really changes is the portability of the data, right, from site to site, and frequency capping and things, like that. And so what I'm more concerned about is, I don't know if you just saw the legislation just passed New York this morning that's going to the New York Senate, but it's very draconian, right? It says every single piece of data that a consumer uses has to be opted in. It's incredibly draconian. And I think what I'm afraid of is going to happen is that this negatively affects the publishers, because as consumers, we're going to just see like opt-in everywhere we go, right? I mean, it's going to become, you think people were irritated seeing ads follow them, wait till they're like having to log into every single site they use and passing that data. And so, my concern is more of just the consumer fatigue, right? And what publishers are going to be faced with versus, the technology providers being able to still provide targeting, because, as Travis said, this has been going on for a long time. So, as folks in this space, we know all the alternatives. We live in it every day, and there's contextual targeting, there's IP targeting, there's all kinds of alternatives, and we've been GDPR compliant, since it started in May of 2018. So we're very familiar with all the opt-in policies, and so I would just encourage the buyers to just talk to their agencies, talk to their DSPs, understand what's available, because you need to get educated, right? It's very nuanced. And so you need to get educated, but I wouldn't fear this. I would just get educated and start testing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I feel, most clients, when they are assessing out, understanding where the data comes from is kind of the first step, and I think it's something we practice too when meeting with partners. Again, how are you sourcing this data? Is it cookie free, or is it ID free, et cetera? So that's really important to start building. But Travis, curious to get your thoughts, especially because you guys are kind of leading this forefront of a kind of identity resolution. So I can imagine you guys are super busy with a ton of clients reaching out to kind of parse their first party data. But what are you advising to clients that don't necessarily have the first party data? Could they still work with a LiveRamp on some sort of solution to kind of build on those audiences? Or what are you kind of talking about to more like brands that are focused on branding versus performance to make use of first party data?
Yeah, 100%. So I think, we see most brands have access to some type of data. So maybe you don't have a great CRM file. That's okay. Maybe you're a CPG brand, and at the end of the day, CPG goods, probably not getting a ton of folks logging in, signing up for their CRM. But what they do have access to is second party data. So that CPG company can work with retailers and get access to transaction data, and then use that for trade campaigns there. What they also have access to is third-party data. So we think that there's going to be a renaissance around third-party data as we move away from the cookie, particularly offline third-party data, where you have data, sourced with clear consumer intent, and that you have, really reliable offline data. All of that today works in the cookieless world. You can take that and you can buy on a people-based ID. So like Austin was mentioning, like we've partnered with the Trade Desk to enable any brand who's a Trade Desk customer to leverage our ID there. brands can then do that with first, second, or third-party data. So, when we talk to brands, our focus is pick a campaign, take one that you're running this summer, 30, 60-day campaign, and just run it on people-based identity. Look at the KPIs, look at the metrics, see how it works, see what types of inventory you buy, see where you have access to inventory that you didn't have before, see what your CPMs look like, and just run a test. If you have a big enough data set, we can do an A/B test. For most brands, we recommend just taking a campaign and running it. We've consistently seen better results, so we feel confident in that. The campaigns have never underperformed the cookie campaign, so we feel good on that. But our message is just pick a campaign where you're running third-party data today, where you're running second-party data today. If you have first-party data, fantastic, pick that campaign and run that and test that. And I think that's particularly true for brands who are DV360 clients, because DV360 has really come out and taken a stance that they're not going to use people-based identity. So for those brands who are saying, okay, take one of your DV360 campaigns and let's work with a partner like Magnite and let's get it running through a private marketplace deal. Still buying on DV360, but doing a little bit of a different workflow. That's a new muscle for brands to learn. They haven't done audience-based PMPs in a lot of cases. You can still use your first, second, or third-party data. You still use DV360, campaign performs very well. But I think really, our message to brands is let us sit down with you, but let's plan something for this summer. Because we really don't have that many months left. When we look at the holiday season, you don't want to be doing all this testing in your holiday campaigns. You want to get this testing done much earlier than that.
Yeah, that's a great point too about leveraging kind of the PMPs. And Garrett, would love to understand kind of your point of view. There's so much outside of just the data and the different solutions around the cookie data. I mean, there's such great publisher data and kind of going and looking at PMP deals and finding scale and kind of nuances and performance there. Would love to hear you kind of speak about that.
Yeah, I mean, both from the buy and the sell side, there's a ton of audience-based PMPs running through exchanges like Magnite and other exchanges as well. And to Travis's point, we as an exchange have the ability to receive an audience from an advertiser's point of view or from a publisher's point of view, indexed against virtually any identifier. And for sure, try some indexed against an IDL or other people-based identifiers, try it indexed against a cookie, see what sort of performance you get between the two. Because again, you have the opportunity to do that now. When you still have third-party cookies, you have a baseline of things to refer to and a performance to refer to that you can compare against essentially the future. To your question, we're definitely seeing more and more publishers come to us and say, okay, we realize that we're going to have some level of authenticated based identifiers in the future, that we're going to have first-party based identifiers. We've got a bunch of information about users on our sites and our apps, and increasingly in our world playlists, and things you're listening to or watching are incredible indicators of intent and affinity and whatnot. How do we bring those things into a platform like yours and make them available to Austin or to Mark, and how do we make them monetizable and measurable in the future? And audience-based PMPs from the sell side are by far not a new thing for us, but we're definitely building out the capabilities to make those things scale more easily, and the identifiers that they're connected to not be so balkanized, and be able to help facilitate audience-based buys from either the buy or the sell side.
Right. And now I kind of want to spend some time going into the solutions, right? Because it's now becoming a bit crowded, a bit fragmented. There's a lot out there. But really from like a high level, there's kind of two approaches that are happening, or at least that we are seeing. The first approach, which Google kind of kicked off in their privacy sandbox, is the whole idea around cohorts, and flocks. So looking at users in a group instead of on an individual level, which is something that, like the Trade Desk and LiveRamp is kind of doing. So it's kind of like a cohort approach where you're grouping users together versus kind of looking at pure identity resolution solutions that still take into account individual users, but they're protecting their data. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of both, right? Because there's still kind of a split right now of opinions and kind of two options. So we'd love to kind of hear your guys' opinion, especially, Austin, would love to hear your view.
Yeah, I might follow and get a couple of Garrett's footsteps and say something that might be controversial. But if we think about what Google, or like where we've ended up today is really a result of years of lobbying and litigation that formed things like CCPA and GDPR. I think that identity-based solutions, people-based solutions, consent-based solutions are a natural progression to that, right? What GDPR existed in the vein of was to gain consent for the actions that advertisers and marketers were doing online, whether that was targeting or tracking users for a targeting or measurement solution. Google is really taking a step away from that, being like, if we bundle them up into a group of people and we don't have to ask for consent because there's a layer of anonymity there. And that is a solution. I just would argue that it's not the one that consumers need, right? Like the consent conversation needs to happen. And bringing that to the forefront, I think is important. And so we certainly plan, and as I expect everybody does, to support the initiatives that Google's bringing forward in Flocks and Fledge, and run those alongside the other solutions. And so the people-based and the opt-in and consent-based solutions. And I think that's an important distinction. If I think about some of the advantages of consent-based solutions or email-based solutions, one of them is inherently the ability to reach the same user in a deterministic way across devices, right? And so the CTV space has exploded in the last year and a half. And we're in a position where like all of that data is joined back to cookies or IDFAs or Android device IDs, largely probabilistically. Having a true deterministic identifier to have a user log into the same NBCU with the same email address NBCU versus to Bloomberg on two completely different devices gives marketers for the first time ever a true deterministic cross-device linkage. That's something that Fledge or Flocks could never support, right? That's a singular in-browser solution. And so one is Google's attempt to really hold the information inside of Chrome and keep it inside of Chrome and do it in a way that they don't have to have that hard conversation and ask for consent, and how less is publishers and asking for consent. And what is really a much more open, forward sort of conversation with consumers about really the value add of consent and the quid pro quo of the internet, which is you're getting this content for free in exchange for targeted advertising. And I think it's really more justifiable to me to have that conversation up front than to play some pseudo cohorting game in the background and have machine learning run that. Again, might be a little bit controversial, but
Yeah. No, I mean,
I like the controversial tracks. So let's just stay there for a minute, right? So what Austin said is exactly right. Like Google is trying to go backwards, right? They're trying to like let the machine do all the thinking for you. And oh, by the way, I control that machine, right? And I have access to that data, right? If you read Apple's privacy policy, go read your iPhone privacy policy. It says you consent to Apple to use your data any way they want for marketing, for whatever. And it's just this morning, I got an Apple TV phone inside my settings on my iPhone. So if you think Apple's not doing this to gain commercial leverage, you're fooling yourselves. Apple does not care about privacy. Apple cares about controlling data, as does Google. So I agree with Austin 100%. When you go the consent route, then you take those decisions out of those folks' hands. People are opting in, and the conversation ends, right? Once someone opts in, and I love the track that the Trade Desk is on, because I just think people need to be educated that, look, we need this data to provide you with quality free content. Like no one thinks this is for free, right? And so there's just an education gap. And I think that's the path we're on. And I agree with Austin, that's the path we should stay on. And Flock and Fledge and all these things that are steps backwards because Google is just trying to maintain control.
Yeah, the only thing with consent is, are we asking users for consent before they even know what they're consenting? Because you think
no, the answer,
yeah.
No, so this is where it gets really, Apple, is trying to scare people, right? And CCPA, when you say don't steal my data, don't share my data, well, what data, right? If consumers think about identity theft, they think about real problems, right? Whereas this is just, behavioral data in exchange for advertising. And so saying, and the consent needs to be that simple, right? We're going to use your data to market you more effectively, and we're not going to use anything else, hard stop, right? When you say consent, you have to define what the consent is for And consumers have to understand that because they've given Apple and Google consent unknowingly, right? And now they're opted into everything Apple and Google wants to do with no consent because it's buried in their privacy policy. And because I use Chrome or because I use, Google search engine.
Got it. For more consent-based solutions, do you think, because right now the issue is scale, but over time, do you think people will re-opt in? Do you think how do we get user numbers up in terms of being able to be tracked to get more personalized ads? Because right now, Apple hasn't shared their full numbers yet, but the numbers are still quite low, especially what we're hearing from other partners that are going through a total reset, especially for location-based partners. So everyone with iPhone kind of mobile device ID location tracking, they're seeing a massive recess and a deletion from that data. So how do we get, users on board to kind of re-opt in into kind of sharing? Otherwise, because without this consent, is identity solutions and resolutions really scalable? That's one thing Google does kind of make a point of, at least with these flocks, it is scalable and you could kind of activate, now almost.
You can activate against consent-based identifiers now too. I also don't think there's a scalability issue. I think that's overblown. We have advertisers transacting on people-based IDs, whether that's an IDL or a UID today, and seeing scale with that. We also have to think about how you have the value exchange conversation and where that conversation is challenging versus where it's not. If I think about the major touch points that I have with the internet, I'm logged into most of those anyway. Every app on my phone has my email address or my phone number by default. Every app on my CTV devices has my email address or my phone number by default. You have to log in to reach those experiences. Some portions of the internet, of the actual browsable internet, are a little behind on that. That's going to change, and that's going to change really quickly. For the last 2 years, we've been bombarding people with the I accept or I consent buttons for cookie tracking. It's not going to be that different. You're going to go to a page, it's going to ask one time to enter an email address. You're going to put in your email address. It's going to sign you into that content, and you'll have access to it. And that conversation will be had upfront. I was reading Wired the other day. I read an article, I clicked on another one. It put up a modal and it said, hey, sign in, create a Wired account. Otherwise, you can't access our content anymore. I put in my email address, and it was a one-time thing. I presumably there's a first-party cookie stored on me on wired.com, and every time I go, it says, hi, Austin, lets me do whatever I want. And that's a workflow that I think people get used to. And largely everyone has been conditioned into that by the interactions they have with their phone anyway. I don't think that there's a huge hurdle to cross on having a very similar experience on a website. And anybody that says the contrary, I think is just not thinking either far enough ahead or doesn't understand the scale of UID or IDLs today, which is pretty substantial.
Right.
I've got a question for Austin as a follow-up for that. Are you, in the supply partners that you work with, is that something you're advocating for or pushing them to do in adopting authentication?
Yeah, I think it's important for the entire ecosystem to adopt the consent conversation and that authentication layer. And so I think we'll see different behaviors from different portions of the internet, right? So if you think about the large publisher groups, the head of the internet, right? The top 30 publishers, they have much more power because of the content they create, and they can do exactly what Wired did to me, which is have the open consent conversation and put a little bit of a wall there. The mid-tail of the internet will have to find ways to encourage that while not necessarily preventing them from accessing content. And then the long tail of the internet will hopefully have much more support of their niche audiences and be able to have that conversation pretty transparently. Hey, if you really like our content, it would be awesome if you supported us and allowed us to serve you targeted ads. And I really don't think that's a hard conversation to have, right? The content that each of us chooses to interact with is content we enjoy. We often wish well for those publishers, and doing what we can to help them increase their revenue model, to help them persist in the future should be important to us. This is a mechanism through which we can do that, and do that arguably more successfully than we have in the past, right? I look at a world in which the consent conversation actually allows more long-tail publishers to be successful in the long term than where we were with third-party cookies. Right? I think publishers get squeezed less in the next 3 years, not more. And I think that is a huge win for consumers and a huge win for publishers and a huge win for sort of the open idea sharing across the internet. And that's a future that I think isn't that challenging to get to. Right. I think it just is a conversation.
Right. So last question then on this topic, Travis, Garrett, what are your final kind of votes or thoughts? You know, the cohort kind of targeting method, or really going back to this kind of individual user identity kind of opt-in resolution?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of falls already with the cohorts. It's important to note they only work on Chrome, so we're talking about a one browser solution. So already that's 60% of the market. It doesn't seem that they're going to work in the EU. So now we've just wiped out a huge market over there. And I think what really matters though for publishers and marketers is you have no idea why a flock is what it is. We can all make smart guesses, and there's going to be a whole crop of companies that come up about how to figure out why is this flock visiting my site, what flock should I be buying, and that's going to be a really cool industry that we're going to see develop. But at the end of the day, only one company knows why a flock was created and why I'm in one flock and Garrett is in another flock, and that's Google. And so we're putting more power in the hands of the major companies. And I think we instead need to move away from that. Now, I think there are some really cool cohort proposals, and I'm going to give a shout out to Microsoft. I think Parakeet is 1,000 times better than flocks. Like, here's something where the browser is being transparent. You're still doing cohort based, but it's very transparent why you use this in one Parakeet versus the other. So I think there's an opportunity for cohorts, but a lot of work to be done. With that said, the gold standard is always going to be authentication. And this is true for Google as well. Let's look at where Google's money comes from. YouTube and search, those aren't using flocks. Those are going to use authentication to power them. So Google, the world's largest publisher, is not even using their own flock solution for their own advertising as a publisher. Same with Facebook. Facebook is all based on authentication. So from a marketer perspective, you already live in a mostly authenticated world. It just happens to be that most of the authentications today are on the major publishers. And now is the chance for the open internet to catch up and to have a level playing field and to be able to use these people-based IDs. For a long time, the open internet was hampered by the third-party cookie. You couldn't really compete with Facebook and Google. They operated at the person level. We operate on the cookie level. Now, as Austin points out, we've got these IDs working. They work today, they work on platforms, and they see higher results. And that's why I think we see such better performance. So I think you're always going to have that authenticated space be the gold standard. And when we talk about scale, I don't think scale is a technology problem. These IDs have scale. What scale is a trust problem. I think as an industry, we did lose the trust of the consumer. We did a really bad job of explaining the cookie value exchange, and consumers got really confused. As Mark pointed out, consumers thought, the cookie knows everything. The cookie is listening to me. It's connected to my social security number. All these truly horrifying things that we all sit here and we're like, no, it's a random ID that expires about once every 30 days, if not more often than that. And instead, we did a horrible job of explaining it. And now we have an opportunity to do a better one, like the Wired example. If you type in your email address, you get free content. We're going to personalize your advertising experience, but you're going to have access to free content. So if we can gain consumer trust, I think we can have great authentication rates. Again, look at Facebook and Instagram. You have 100% authenticated inventory. And these are companies who went through the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and they still have 100% authenticated inventory. Why? Because Instagram is really cool. And Facebook is really cool. They're great products. Like, let's be honest, we probably all use them, and consumers like them. And they made that value exchange clear. The open internet should learn from that. And I think if we do that, we can have a much better ecosystem and a much better offering for marketers over the next year.
Right.
Yeah, 100% agree with all of that. It is interesting to note, however, that there will be some percentage of the internet that's not logged in. And this is the rocky period that we were talking about in the beginning of this. And I hope that we really get excellent at that value exchange and excellent at that education, and that it really, gets out into the rest of the open internet and makes it, an equitable environment. I'll say one thing about flocks. The concept, for those that are not logged in, the concept of anonymous cohorts is not a bad idea. It's actually a good idea. The proposed execution of it in terms of flock in Chrome is, don't read any article that's not written by Google. It's kind of atrocious. It also really threatens smaller publishers because it's going to be difficult for them to have enough scale to be able to generate flocks, to be able to get them into the midstream, et cetera. Flock as an idea, as a concept, is not a bad idea for the non-logged in internet. And it's not a bad idea for Google because they don't need logins at all, to Travis's point. And they have not that they don't need logins, they have all the logins they will ever need, is the point. They don't need more of or they don't need more information about you in order to generate audiences. But the concept of the flock is a good one. The notion that it should all be in some magic machine learning box in the browser, and there's auctions in the browser, and the only trusted entity across our ecosystem is Google. That's why it's meeting with such resistance.
Right, that's helpful. Yeah, I think the overall consensus, this identity resolution is the way forward versus these kind of interest-based groups. Great to hear. So now moving into kind of other solutions, we did get some questions from the audience. This one is for you, Austin. So can you give some examples other than just kind of cookies, what other identifiers programmatic platforms can utilize? And I definitely want to dive into kind of first party data, et cetera, and kind of what are some of the ways in which we are capturing and kind of utilizing first party data as well.
Yeah, so I think if you think about the world as it stands today, we've all gotten really familiar with this concept of cross-device over the last few years, which is before that we were looking at, okay, tracking in-browser activity on the same browser, the same cookie be done and doing attribution that way. And we developed cross-device to reach audiences better across their devices, to do better advertising to those users, and then to measure that advertising. That concept remains, and like a lot of the underpinning identifiers remain, right? So for the foreseeable future, cookies exist in some capacity, though if they phase out, that doesn't really change the way that cross-device solutions work, right? You have Android IDs continue to exist for a foreseeable future. You have some percentage of IDFAs that continue to exist, and whether that's 9% or 40% based on whatever sort of estimate you read, that's still some percentage. You have the entire CTV landscape, which is largely stitched together between rotating device IDs, some static device IDs and IP addresses today. And then you have logged in information. And for the first time, as I mentioned earlier, for the first time ever, that logged information can give you a true deterministic one-to-one-to-one user flow from device A to device B to device C. And I think we're going to have to, as an industry, change a little bit of our language around the concept of cross-device, right? It's never really been cross-device. In the future, it's definitely not cross-device, right? It's cross IDs, right? There will be IDs that function in different environments or across environments, and we'll string those together and we'll target and we'll measure using solutions that do that. And that arguably means that not a lot, like the IDs get swapped in and out, but the fundamental concept of the way that we market today doesn't change drastically. It's just the IDs that we transact on do. And then if you talk about how logged in identifiers are stronger in some capacity than cookies or other IDs, it's that when they exist, they give you much more transparency into who that user is, what that user's opted into, where that user spends time, and how that user interacts across devices. And so that conversation gets had up front. You get more value out of that user. That cookie, as Travis alluded to, doesn't decay or fall off every 18, 20, 24, 30 days, right? And you end up with a much better way to have a conversation with the user as an advertiser. And I think that's a win for everybody. And as long as we can have the appropriate conversation with consumers about that value exchange, I think we end up with better ads, fewer ads, and more free content. And that's really a win for everybody.
That's great. And what about this more kind of emphasis and focus on first party data? And I guess too, there are some brands that have a plethora of data, but other brands are very limited. I guess, what are the best ways to kind of build up and kind of capture first party data in terms of building that audience? I mean, Travis, you might know this, Garrett as well, just working with the publishers and how they're collecting data. What are just some things that marketers could do today and kind of best practices for getting that first party data?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think marketers can kind of think of this similarly to publishers. What value can I offer users in exchange for their first party data? How do I present a great value exchange? I think many marketers would do that by saying, hey, you'll get a discount. You see this often. If you visit an e-commerce site today, there's a good chance you're going to get asked. If you give your email, you get 10 or 15% off. Well, that's great. That builds a value exchange. And then I'm starting to interact with the brand. I think newsletters are an incredibly powerful tool. Now, we way overused them just as an industry a few years ago, but people are very selective now in the newsletters they get, and they read the ones they do, and they click through it. We see with ATS that some of our highest authentication rates come with publishers who have a great newsletter following. And it's people who read the news and then they click through it to read more of it on the site. or they see an interesting piece of content and they click through to read the full piece. Marketers should be doing the same. So I think marketers and publishers can look at the authentication place, or sorry, the authentication issue in the same way. We're trying to build a relationship. How do I offer value? And then how do I make that relationship last? And so something we're talking a lot about pubs and marketers about is once you have a user, that's great, but that's only part of the problem. Now you need to keep the user engaged and continue to offer them a value exchange, that they keep visiting your site, they keep authenticating. And I think there's going to be a lot of strategies for that, because with all of the cookieless solutions, you still need to have an authentication happen every 30 days or so. That's about how long a people-based ID lasts, unless the user refreshes it and retouches the site. So that's, I think for marketers and publishers, they need to focus on that. But really, it gets down to the value exchange. What, as a marketer, can you offer the consumer to share their data with you? We've found that consumers are really eager and willing to share their data if there's something in it for the consumer. And marketers who do a great job of that are the ones who get the huge CRM lists.
I also think it's important to note that this is just an opportunity for brands, right? First-party data has always been the most valuable data to any brand, right? Like second-party data and third-party data is largely less valuable for those brands than first-party data. They do have value in the marketplace, and they will continue to be useful. Brands that have a lot of first-party data today are probably just a little bit ahead, right? In terms of looking towards the future. This creates an opportunity to have that conversation a little bit more readily, to collect that data and then to action against it. And so I don't think it's a huge pivot, right? I don't think there's certainly some additional incentivization, but first party data has always been extremely valuable.
Yeah. What about?
Yeah, and just to
go ahead.
just to add to that real quick, right? Because we're B2B focused,
Yeah.
right? So our co-op are all business news and professional trade. Guys like Informa, like, CFO Magazine, like, HR.com. And these are all professionally oriented sites. And they have huge opt-in rates because I go there for my profession, right? I'm getting real value, right? And so, I'll easily give a registration and continue getting, if I'm an HR professional, I'm going to go to HR.com, I'll easily sign up for that because I'm getting really meaningful content. And so everyone's kind of been focused on B2C in the conversation, but I think B2B is in a different position just because the value proposition is so clear, right? If I want to go learn about the latest HR, benefits software, right? That's a huge value to me.
Yeah, I think it's definitely more difficult too for newer B2B brands. Like, how do they offer that value exchange if first they need to build on that awareness and kind of attract users, using that HR example, finding users in HR to come to my site and find it really relevant. But, with the absence of third-party cookies, that first touch point could be a bit more difficult, especially in terms of the value exchange. So how do you see kind of newer B2B brands kind of entering a space, kind of offering some type of mechanism to kind of capture first-party data?
Yeah, I think the targeting side in your example, those B2B folks are more advertisers, right? They're trying to attract people. And because we also have access to first-party data, we're still going to have that data across the co-op. So to Austin and Travis's and Garrett's point, like, this data is not going away. It's just going to be accessed differently. And that's what we're seeing.
Great.
I also just want to re-echo something that Travis said earlier, that the third-party cookies going away doesn't necessitate third-party data disappearing. Those are two very different things, and third-party data remains and second-party data remains, and they continue to add value.
That's great. So what would you kind of give advice to marketers, looking ahead, thinking ahead, to kind of future-proof their campaigns and kind of strategies in terms of planning? What are the key top of minds that they need to be thinking of? And, this whole idea also, as well as going down publisher direct route, do these conversations with direct publishers need to be happening now? Do you suggest going to an SSP and kind of building those relationships, or where should a marketer start today in terms of just campaign execution and planning? Of course, before the Q4, before holiday.
Yeah, I'll take a quick pass. We talked about earlier, again, from a B2B perspective, we're building private marketplaces, right? And if you want to reach business people in business environments, a private marketplace is a very easy way to do it. And that's tried and true. It's been around forever. So we've got a lot of advertisers now transacting on deal IDs And it works, right? Because you're in the right environments. And again, it's more work for the buyer sometimes, but the benefits outweigh the additional work. And we're just seeing, it's funny. It's kind of like Back to the Future. We're seeing a big move towards contextual and a big move towards PMPs, because you can get very similar audiences and very similar attributes. It's just through a little different mechanism.
Yeah, I think there's certainly places where PMPs add an enormous amount of value and can be used as part of a buy. The open market still does as much of that as it ever has, right? You can go and you can transact against the audiences that you're used to in the same or some different capacity across the open market, and sometimes that necessitates a change in how your data gets there. And be cognizant of that and plan for that, and plan on how you get the data that you need to activate your campaign against into the buying platform that you're using to buy the inventory that you want to buy. And there are varying processes to get there, and those and there might be more in a future state than there are today. But you end up in a position where the buying strategy largely doesn't change. And so certainly there'll be contextual buys in the future. There've been contextual buys in the past. There'll be private market buys for specific inventory or specific audience sets against specific inventory in the future, just like there have been in the past. But that doesn't take the place of the open exchange inventory that comes through and gets bid on and is readily accessible, where you can find the few users that you really, really want to buy, bid for them what you think they're worth, and win that inventory. That transaction mechanism stays the same, and it's just about getting the data that you need to action against into your buying platform to do that.
Yeah, Travis already alluded to this earlier, but especially when third-party cookies are still here, I would recommend indexing audiences against some other identifier, an IDL, a UID2, identifier of your choice. Pipe it into your SSP and compare, because you can still do that today. And by the way, most DSPs probably have not retooled their decision making and their bidding algorithms to look at not their third-party cookie when it's there. So, if you use a PMP or a deal ID as a proxy for an identifier, you've got a bucket of audience, indexed some other way, it's a great way to compare and figure out what the world will look like in the future, because we will for sure see deal IDs, PMP is used as an audience descriptor or a label for an audience, from now and forever, because it's an excellent way to proxy the value or the membership of an audience outside of an identifier.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the kind of final question I want to definitely get into is, there's so much about solutions and testings, and it seems to be the identity resolution is the way to go, especially until we figure out what cohorts and kind of interest-based groups are. But I mean, what we haven't discussed, and really the industry has been really quiet about, is measurement. And, how are we going to measure the effectiveness of these strategies? Yes, we could do it now and kind of benchmark now, but in the future, when kind of conversion tracking does go away, well, not necessarily go away, it becomes more difficult, and things like frequency capping across site, what could we do now? Is there any solutions your companies are working on to kind of look at measurement or the effectiveness of campaigns, or, what needs to happen still from the industry? And I know, Max, you spent some time on this as well, so we'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I can start off first. I mean, one of the things we're looking into is, working with, advertisers to figure out how we can deliver conversion data through server-server API connection, as opposed to, to supplement things that we were seeing on the cookie side. This will allow us to, get a kind of a feedback loop established, so we have a better idea of where attribution is, how it pans out. So we're, talking to a couple partners to kind of facilitate that, but that's a huge discussion point moving forward is, how this is going to help power measurement and attribution. And then we've already seen impacts where, people are opting out essentially of being tracked. So for an advertiser to collect this first party data and share it with us, and we can then in turn transfer it over to our execution platforms, it's a big tool for us to be able to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, and I think,
go for it.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I mean, I think, one of the beauties of transacting on people-based IDs is every impression becomes measurable. Measurement was tough with a third-party cookie. Your conversion pixel fails today on Safari, Edge, Firefox. When you buy on a people-based ID, it works. When you are, as a marketer, connecting your people-based identity to pub people-based identity, you can have full closed-loop attribution. You can have full click-through conversion. So we actually, I think, are going to see this amazing period of innovation in conversion and understanding the consumer much better than we ever did with the third-party cookie. So, and again, this is what's powered the walled gardens. They've had amazing conversion and attribution programs because they work on people-based identity. We're now bringing those same capabilities to the open internet. So when we look at the measurement use cases we power for clients, we see the opportunities where now every impression you buy can be connected to an offline store transaction, can be connected to a website visit. You can really truly understand the consumer journey. These people-based IDs we talk about too are omni-channel. They work across cookies, but also CTV, and they work across mobile and app. So now you get conversion across all of the channels at a global level at the person base. It's really, I think, a much more compelling offering than we've ever had for marketers before.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Right, you end up with better information across devices to track to better conversion. And so in the past, like people looked at conversion information inside of the programmatic landscape as like, okay, let's do e-commerce based conversions where cookies are present. And now everybody gets to have the conversation on like, let's look at conversions. It's certainly the same in those space where those IDs are available and those users are opted in the same way, but you get to bring in so much more offline data, offline transaction, and really color in that picture in a way that hasn't happened before. So I'm completely agreeing with Travis, right? I think the future state of measurement looks way better than the measurement solutions we've all been operating on for the past 5 or 8 or 10 years.
Great. Mark, were you going to say something on conversions?
No, I think this to me goes to the Rocky Road conversation, right? Because it's going to be, let's be real. It's going to be really rocky coming out, especially frequency cap, right? How do you frequency cap without any scale on IDs? So, I do agree with Austin and Travis. Longer term, it's going to be a better solution, but let's not kid ourselves. It's going to be a lot of work to measure and frequency cap, right? Over whatever period this it takes us to get to identity at scale.
Got it. Great. So final round, we have about 3 minutes left. What are some just predictions and kind of just what you see the future of kind of programmatic advertising at scale? It could be very broad, it could be very specific, but would love to go around and kind of give each one of your predictions. Mine is that ad fraud will hopefully go down and kind of be eliminated with all these better practices in place. So I hope to see a lot less scale in terms of ad fraud and kind of people gaming the systems now that we have better ways to kind of target and measure. So that's my prediction, but would love to hear your guys's.
I have more of a question than a prediction, right? So my question is, as we go to these authenticated solutions and scale goes down because the cookie pools are way overpopulated with a lot of noise. But as that scale goes down, what happens to the publisher's CPMs, right? And when you move to an authenticated world and you have a lot less traffic, but it's authenticated traffic, our brand's going to be willing to pay, right? And so I'm just curious to watch how this whole scale and CPM issue plays out.
Okay. I don't think you have a lot less, certainly publishers don't have a lot less traffic, right? So the traffic remains the same. Some subset of that traffic is opted in. And when that traffic is opted in, those publishers will enjoy higher media CPMs for that. That creates a direct incentive for publishers to have that conversation as transparently as possible and to drive a style of content creation that encourages their user base to opt in. And so I think, yeah, in the short term, there's a risk for publishers who don't have the consent conversations, right? Because suddenly you have it's not apples to apples, right? You're competing in a world where you don't have an identity and your competitive publisher does, and their media CPMs are higher, and accordingly the revenue's higher, which means they can hire better writers and they create better content. And so I think we end up in a place where having appropriate identifiers drives a mild increase in media CPMs that encourages publishers to have that consent conversation more upfront. I think that's good for everybody. I think that my prediction will be that conversation that happens more frequently drives less of a fear of advertising in the future than today. So right now, I think we can all agree there are too many people who are afraid of what we do, that are afraid of the ad ecosystem. And I think in 3 years, hopefully that's not the case, because we've learned to have conversations with consumers in a way that's not scary and not offensive. And that's something that we've needed to do for the last 10 years. And this is a good way to start.
That's a great prediction. I love that. Garrett, Travis, what are your thoughts?
I agree that we definitely will end up in a much improved place, and that you should not be concerned about that. I think that our systems and the efficacy of our advertising will improve greatly, and I'm actually very optimistic about it. We can debate when the rocky period will start. It will start at some point, so don't assume that it won't. But then once we get through that period, and to Austin's point, are really able to demonstrate the value of what this industry is doing, and it's not identity is not weaponized, and cookies are stealing your data, and your grandmother heard about it. Programmatic will continue to eat the world, and it's we will be in a better place for it. It's just going to take a little bit of time and transition to get there.
Yep, I would agree 100% with Garrett. I think overall, like, we're moving in a better direction. And I think the publishing industry is going to benefit from this, and the marketers are going to benefit. But it's probably going to be a bumpy, couple months as we see the cookie finally go away.
Great. Max, any final predictions before we head out?
No, I mean, one of the key takeaways is this whole theme of trust, right? And really just seeing advertisers really being bullish about establishing that trust, with their audience. And so a lot of everything that we talked about is all stemming from all of that. So I'm excited to see how things change as it relates to first party data collection, and then, the means to go and grab that data.
Great. Oh, well, I can't thank everyone enough for your time today. Some big takeaways. Marketers need to test now, test today to start building those benchmarks. It sounds like, identity resolution is going to be key. So marketers definitely need to reach out to Travis and Austin, and definitely the rest of the members on the team here. And then looking at P&Ps, go out, reach out to Garrett and kind of figure out what works for your brand. And then again, with Mark, I mean, most of their data that they have available is still, usable for the future. So it's not, third-party data going away, it's third-party cookies. So really, we still have a lot of great advantages to take on. But thank you all for your time. We will follow up with questions for those in the chat who did write. We'll follow up in email, but if you have any more questions, feel free to email us at marketing@audiencex.com, and we can get back to you with your questions. But thank you all for your time. Really great speaking to you all.
Thank you all.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.